How do you do, ladies and gentlemen? What's the real truth about Citizen Kane?
It'll probably turn out to be a very simple thing.
Hello, everybody everywhere. We hope you're doing well. I'm Parker.
And I'm Max.
And welcome back to Better Than Citizen Kane, the highly subjective show where we take a look at a movie and ask the question, is it better than Citizen Kane?
As always, if you like Citizen Kane, that's fine because we're not here to hate on it. After all, there is a reason it's earned its reputation.
But when every movie ever made is a reasonable contender for the title of greatest film of all time, you have to wonder, better than Citizen Kane?
So start your laundry, grab your W-2s, and get ready to do some verse jumping, as this week we get sucked into a bagel to talk about everything everywhere all at once.
Marvelous. Very well done.
Thank you. We're back, baby.
We're back, baby.
Who's our guest this week, Parker?
Our guest is the illustrious, the incomparable Mr. Jake Nordfelt, who we are so excited to have.
I appreciate that, Parker and Max. I'll give you incomparable for sure, because no one is like me, but illustrious, maybe you took it a step too far with that, but I'll be okay with it.
I don't think
so. No, not at all. Not at all. Jake, tell our listeners a little bit about yourself.
Well, I met Parker in SUU when we were at college. We did films together for a little bit there, and then I met Max through him, good friends of these two. I love movies, and I love to watch them with my friends, and I love to talk about why they are so emotionally relevant to all of us, which I think is a great way to start talking about this incredible film, Everything Everywhere All at Once, which, as we all know, just swept at the Oscars, and I think this is going to be an awesome episode to just talk about how this chalks up to Citizen Kane and how we read it in our emotional lives. I think it's awesome.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
Absolutely.
We're so excited. This is going to be
super excited about this. Jake, why don't you get us started by talking a little bit about your extensive history with this film?
Yeah. What do you want to know, man?
I mean, when did you first see it? What drew you to it? And then since then, just usually we talk about, when did we first see the movie? How many times maybe have we seen
Amazing.
it?
Can we count that high? I don't know. No, I'm just kidding. So I saw this movie, I believe I saw this movie opening night in theaters with a group of friends. And from the first time I watched it, I was just hooked. I knew that this movie was going to be for me. I knew that this movie was saying something to me. I got really emotional the first time I watched it, but couldn't quite understand why, because the movie is so just overwhelming a little bit at your first experience. But since then, I went back to visit it in theaters several times. I ended up getting a tattoo inspired by the movie. And then when we screened it for this episode to talk about on the podcast, that was my 15th time watching this movie. So needless to say, I am a huge fan. This movie is definitely classified as my number one favorite of all time. I adore this movie from the first time I saw it to the very 15th time I've seen it.
I love that. That's super fun. Yeah, I was really excited to talk to you about this movie because I knew it was like so special to you and it touched you in such a big way. And I'm super excited to dive into all that more. What about you, Max? What's your experience with this movie?
So yeah, I remember seeing a lot of the promos leading up to it, mostly through Instagram ads, which were very googly eye focused. And I was like, oh, what is this? This looks very interesting. And then, I go to see movies with my dad a lot. Ever since I was a kid, we've seen a lot of movies together in theaters. And so we were talking about it and like, oh, have you heard about this movie, Everything Everywhere All at Once? It's got Michelle Yeoh in it. And so we went together in theaters, and it was a wonderful experience. I really didn't know anything about it. Really, like I was like, okay, googly eyes, it's multidimensional. Michelle Yeoh's in it, and that's all I really knew. And I had a great time. The people next to me did not. There was a lot of during the movie. There was a lot of okay, and like whispers to each other of like, what's going on? And I have no idea. And like, I don't even know what they're saying. And then at the end, they stood up and the guy said, well, I've never seen anything like that in my entire life. And the girl that he was with said, and I hope to never again.
Oh,
and then they walked out of the theater and I was like, what a perfect summation of just some of the people that in the world. I don't know. Like, I don't know. We'll get into it, but I think that almost cemented more for me what this movie was. And to me, it is what it says right on the tin of it is a absolute summation of everything that humanity is and can be and has been and often is. And when you're presented with everything, I think that there is a tendency in some people to be like, like I don't want to see that. Like that's gross, or that was weird.
Interesting.
But obviously for a lot of people, it really kind of made an impact. But we'll get into that a little bit as we get further into the episode. Parker, what was your? Oh, and then I watched it for the second time with you guys. That was my second time watching it.
Yay!
So I saw it in theaters once, and I always meant to watch it again, and I never did. And then I watched it again for this podcast. So I'm 2 views in. Still kind of processing everything everywhere all at once. So Parker, what's your experience with this movie?
I would say that my experience is pretty similar to yours, Max. Like I saw the advertising, it was coming out. A lot of people were talking about it. I had sort of a vested interest because Will and I are very intrigued and like always aware of other directing duos and like what they're doing. And so Daniels are very exciting filmmakers for us, and like the buzz this movie was getting, we were like, okay, cool. Like let's go see that. And so I saw it in theaters, and it was, I don't know if it was opening night, but it was pretty close to the opening. It was like, the month it came out, and was really just kind of blown away by it. I was just completely overwhelmed. And I was pleasantly surprised because I had seen their other film, Swiss Army Man, and it wasn't for me. I think it's a well-made movie, but it didn't connect with me. I didn't vibe with it very much. And so I was like, I don't know, it looks interesting. It might be a little bit not my speed, but I'll at least go see it. And really just loved this one, to the point that I think I saw it at least a couple more times in theaters. I think when we all watched it together was, I think, my 4th watch. So double up on you, Max. I got twice. I'm nowhere approaching 15, but we've got a variety, I suppose.
Absolutely.
And yeah, I just I really loved it, and seeing it succeed and seeing it just grow and grow and grow and grow was so exciting to kind of watch happen in real time as a fan of the movie, as a fan of independent filmmakers, as a fan of directing duos. It was really exciting, very bolstering for me to watch that happen and know that like, oh, hey, like we, in so many ways, the film industry right now is more of a dumpster fire than it has ever been, with studios writing off completely finished films for, tax write-offs and throwing all of that work out the window of, hundreds of artists and workers. And there's some really troubling trends with all of that, but also like this film for me represented such a pinpoint of light in the middle of all that messiness of like, hey, things do suck and things are bad in the film industry as a whole, but also we're at a point in the film industry where a movie like this can win Best Picture and sweep the Oscars. And I think that's really fantastic.
Which, by the way, is something that Citizen Kane did not do. It did not win Best Picture. So
sounds like we have our answer.
All right. Well, thanks everybody.
On that, thanks everybody for watching.
No, I actually had a question I wanted to ask Parker. What do you think was more impactful to you about Everything Everywhere All at Once compared to Swiss Army Man? What about this movie connected to you more than that one? I haven't seen it myself, but I'm just curious.
I think this one got me. Like, there are elements, like, there are very similar themes, I would say. But this one was more successful in, like, getting me fully in touch with my own humanity and just, like, the broader picture of what it is to be a human being and what it is to exist. And there's kind of sprinklings of that in Swiss Army Man. But I think the absurdity of that premise kind of kept me away as a first-time viewer. I need to rewatch it now that I've watched this and I understand more about the Daniels and their career and, their personal tastes. I should revisit it and maybe give it a second shot. Just at the time, the really high concept premise, I think, kept me at arm's length from some of my like emotions, whereas this one like got all right up in there for me.
Right.
Oh, that's so interesting. Swiss arms length.
Um, anyway.
Anyway,
Sorry, that one really got me. I
No,
don't
no,
know
no,
what to tell
no.
you.
Jake, do you want to just kind of give a brief summary of this film and what it is? I imagine a lot of people are familiar because this is one of our more great. I mean, it's great that it's one of our more mainstream episodes. But yeah, do you want to give a summary?
Yeah, totally. Well, first, before I do that, I just think it's so funny. I remember after seeing the movie and recommending it to people while it was still in theaters, people would come to me and say, "What is this movie about? Can you describe this movie to me?" And I would always be at a loss for words, because how do you describe a movie that is so wild and crazy, like Everything Everywhere All at Once? As you said, Max, it really just encapsulates everything that humanity can, is, and will be, potentially. So, but to me, what the movie is at its heart is a movie between a mom and a daughter. So an aging Chinese immigrant woman is kind of working over a laundromat with her husband. She's taking care of her father, who's also an immigrant. And they just kind of work tirelessly to try to keep their lives in order, as she has a daughter who's maybe in her young 20s who is constantly trying to connect with her, but can't quite find that because life just gets so busy and there's so much just chaos kind of in between them in their daily lives. And as they kind of just are navigating their day-to-day, this Chinese woman played by Michelle Yeoh named Evelyn Wang, she is called up on this crazy sci-fi adventure that takes her into a multiverse that explores, other potential life plans and other potential life paths if she would have made different choices. And insanity ensues, and it just gets crazier and crazier. And finally, I think at the end, it reaches a climax in this really beautiful and emotional way that shows kind of Michelle Yeoh and her daughter, who's played by Stephanie Hsu. Her character is most famously known as Jobu Tupaki in the film. They kind of come together in this really beautiful moment that, in my opinion, shows how all of humanity is going to be able to make it through these times that are so tough. And I just think it's a really beautiful movie, and it's such a weird premise, and it's such a weird way to tell this story and to get this idea across. But I think it's really effective in its wildness, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What would you guys add to that? What am I missing?
I would say, like you said, it's such a hard movie to describe, because if you tell someone that the bulk of the main plot's action takes place entirely in a tax office building, they would be like, well, that sounds like the least interesting thing in the world. And you go, no, because Michelle Yeoh's character, Evelyn, is accessing multiple different versions of herself to fight off interdimensional verse jumpers who are switching between versions of themselves in the name of either protecting Evelyn from or defeating Jobu Tupaki, who is the villain, who's also a version of Evelyn's daughter, Joy. And then at the same time, there are also like bagel zealots who are like these, not zealots. What's the word? Like people who are like devoted to a religious cause. Acolytes. There we go. Thank you. Yeah. These acolytes who are serving Jobu Tupaki, and it's really, I don't know. I just feel like I forgot watching it again this time that no, they're in the tax building for like most of the movie, but it's just that we are so scattered across dimensions and alt paths where they've already gone home that it's like, whew, yeah. I don't know, Parker. Anything else to add to the summary, to the synopsis?
Not necessarily. Like, I think anything I'd have to add is kind of jumping more into detail-oriented stuff. So, I think basically, go ahead.
Oh, we should probably talk about Waymond.
Waymond's probably the thing that I would want to address the most. Is that another piece of this is that Evelyn's husband, Waymond, is a very intense optimist in a world that is constantly trying to beat him down in every way that it can. And at every turn of stressful family situations or dealing with all of this tax stuff that's going on, he is constantly trying to be gentle and calm and kind. And sometimes he comes across as very silly and very naive for that. But as the movie goes on, he gets to have a lot of really great moments in the spotlight, kind of championing his worldview of saying, hey, like, this is how I make it through life. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. You may judge me for it, but I think this has served me well, and it's going to continue serving me. And Wayman is my favorite character in this movie. He is wonderful, and he is played marvelously by Ki-hee Kwan, who this is kind of a huge comeback for. This was really, that's another big part of the narrative. Like, this movie on its path to, Oscar glory was his whole story going on in real time, which is just super inspiring and lovely. And if you ever just want to cry, if you want to get in your feels, go watch any one of his acceptance speeches from when he's won multiple awards for this. And it is the most heartfelt, sincere, like, love and joy for acting, for film, for the art of creation. He is an incredible person.
Yes, what a good influence he is, as like we've watched him speak and like just interact with people. He's a bright light in the midst of this dumpster fire that you talked about earlier, Parker. I 100% agree.
Mm-hmm. But I think that's about it for summary stuff. I think we can kind of jump in. For the sake of keeping people as oriented as possible in a very confusing movie, we should try to like tackle things as much in chronological order as they happen in the movie, like as we want to talk about things. So maybe don't jump straight in on like, well, the final shot is my favorite because of this.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So kind of in this first little section, what are some key moments or moments that really stand out to you, Jake? Let's head back to you. What are like some key moments in this first little chunk, maybe before we really get into the meat of verse jumping and such? Is there anything that stands out to you?
Yeah, well, one thing that I love about this movie is, first of all, I watched this movie, and this, again, I can't express enough just how insane and how bonkers this movie is. I feel like this movie is easily 50 movies in one movie. It's just from going to different styles, different universes, different sets, different character designs and everything. It just tackles so much. And one thing I'm so impressed by is just how tight and how detail-oriented it is in the midst of its hugely insane scope. So from the beginning, we start in Evelyn's home, and the production design just screams, this woman is overwhelmed. She is doing the very best she can, but we start in her house, and there's papers everywhere, and it's a little bit messy. There's a lot of clutter. You can tell she's just kind of overwhelmed by her surroundings, as I feel like a lot of us are in life. And I think it just sucks you into that universe, into that first shot in just a really beautiful way. So from there, we kind of move forward. We're introduced to each character one by one. We start with Michelle, then we move into her husband, Wayman, as you guys mentioned. Then Joy, their daughter, comes in with Joy's girlfriend, whose character name I am totally spacing on, which is so embarrassing. Becky, thank you so much. So she brings Becky along, and it's kind of just a hectic morning for them. The whole time as we're shooting this morning scene, the camera is just so smooth. I'm loving how, as we just slowly pan from one character to the next, the camera feels really just like it's almost trying to stay out of the way, I think. Like it's just trying to let the characters in the scene and the setting speak for itself. I think it's a really masterful work. And then that kicks us off into the IRS scenes really, really well, which I think is just a wonderful springboard. What do you guys like from the beginning of the movie? What are scenes and moments that stick out to you?
I think the apartment is a good mention, Jake. I remember, and I wish I had a source on this. I wish I'd actually tried to find this, but I remember an interview with the Daniels at one point where they talk about how they didn't want the apartment to be like other movie apartments, where like usually when you have someone who's like living in, kind of a lower to mid class space, usually movies are still like, yeah, but it's still pretty big because we need space for the camera, we need this sort of thing. But they made an active point of like, no, this needs to feel authentic. This needs to look like an apartment that these people would live in. And I think they do a very good job of that. I think that's a good call. I think, setting up kind of Joy's main conflict with her mom is a really interesting thing they do early on, of especially the moment where she kind of is talking to Evelyn's father, played by James Hong, who's great. And she can't remember, her Chinese isn't great. And he's like, your Chinese is worse every time I see you. And it's just super efficient character writing and like really efficient. And that's something else that you mentioned, Jake, where like this movie is so tight and so like clean and just kind of breezes by, and it doesn't feel like there's any fat on it. It's kind of a miracle to me, because there's so much they're doing in this, and the fact that they start from such a grounded space, which I think is important to the movie, of starting in such a grounded place and like setting up these very authentic character moments of, again, Joy trying to find the word for "this is my girlfriend," and her mom just butts in and says "good friend." This is Becky, and she's Joy's really good friend, and Joy is clearly hurt by that. And just like Wayman's whole thing, he's bringing divorce papers to Evelyn, but she doesn't know that, and we know that. I don't know. I just feel like it's super efficient introduction, and I'm constantly impressed by it. Parker, do you have anything to add?
I mean, I think both of you have covered the bases super well with this whole first section. Just kind of reiterating some of those same points. I love the claustrophobia of this entire first section, not just the apartment, but just in the blocking, in the editing, in, you know, the production design, like every space, whether it is the apartment or the laundromat downstairs, like everything feels cramped. Everything feels busy. They do such a good job in the editing of showing how Evelyn is being pulled a million different directions from the word go. You know, Wayman, Joy, the laundromat patrons, working with the machines, trying to find the bags of laundries for people, trying to skirt around this whole Becky issue that she's clearly uncomfortable with. Like, it just go out of its way to establish pretty dire stakes at the beginning of this movie. Like, you see this all happen, and, you know, very, very quickly, we are presented with that information you were talking about, Max, that Wayman has divorce papers and he wants to talk to Evelyn about it. And he's like, hey, when you have a minute, like, can we talk about something? And she's like, not now, like I'm busy with stuff. And by the end of this intro scene, you completely understand where Wayman is coming from. Not because Evelyn is a terrible person, not because she's awful and mean to him and like spiteful, which I feel like a lot of like marital strife narratives in film, one of them has to be an asshole, one of them has to be the bad guy, and it's very clear. And this is just like, it's just heartbreaking, because you can empathize so clearly with all parties. You see Evelyn at the end of her rope, feeling like her life is burnt out in so many ways. And also you can see how that would have a huge effect on Wayman and their marriage, and him being like, maybe I don't want this anymore. Maybe I don't want to be in the middle of this right now, because I'm not getting anything from you. And, you know, that leads us into going to the IRS building to go see the tax auditor. And like, there's all these really little moments. I'm obsessed in film with really well done setup and payoff. I think it's one of my favorite aspects of filmmaking, of like, one of the benefits of having a contained story told in, you know, a couple hours is that you can very clearly establish motifs and themes and ideas to the audience and then bring them back around. And this movie's full of them. There's so many. The opening shot is this really great push in on a mirror across the room, a circular mirror showing the family happy together singing karaoke. And then we get a harsh cut to morning, and the mirror flops over and we see Evelyn. We push in through the mirror. We already established that like this is a, you know, a mirror dimension. We're getting that idea. The circle coming in with googly eyes and bagels and cyclical nature and yin and yang, and like there's so much of that in this movie. But back to the IRS building, something I really love is while they're heading in through the lobby, Wayman spots an elderly Asian couple across the room, and they're just very loving with each other. You know, the wife gives the husband like a peck on the cheek, and they're just very affectionate. And you can just see this longing in his eyes of just like, I'd like to be loved by my wife. If that could maybe be something I could do, wouldn't that be great?
Really? Yeah.
And it's just, and it comes back in a really great way at the end of the movie. And I love that. But that's like what I will say about the beginning of this movie into like the inciting incident is just that very quickly you establish the table stakes for everybody. You understand all of these characters. You understand the dynamics with each other. You understand why the tension is there, and it's justifiable tension. It's not that Joy is some broad-stroked, teenage stereotype in a movie. You just don't get me, Mom. It's like it's a very real and grounded portrayal of generational gaps. And I love seeing that reflected with Evelyn and her father, which gets fleshed out further in the movie. Like, just, I'm thoroughly impressed by the first 20 minutes of this movie being so good at setting up all of the exposition you need to know. So it's like, okay, here is the groundwork, because we need to get this out of the way quickly. Things are about to go off the rails in a way you've never seen before. So we need to ground you very efficiently in these are the relationships, these are the stakes moving forward. And this is the quote unquote grounded reality we're going to be existing in that will then be interrupted by all of the sci-fi shenanigans and absurdity that's about to ensue.
Yeah.
You said that so eloquently and beautifully, and that juxtaposition specifically of this very grounded, extremely human family, like you said, every single person is relatable. We relate to Wayman, we relate to Michelle, we relate to James Hong, we relate to Stephanie Shu's character, we relate to them all because they're all so human and grounded, only to have literally the rug pulled out from under us and have everything just come to this crazy, like, inception, this crazy beginning when we enter the IRS elevator.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's key that this movie starts as if it could just be going into a family drama.
Yeah.
Because that's basically what it is, about taxes and laundry.
Right.
And then they get into the elevator and Waymond suddenly shifts and is different. And
we don't really know why, which is so interesting.
We got we got a little hint of him on the security cams at the laundromat doing some flips and stuff, but
yeah.
Were you going to say something, Jake?
No, I was just going to point out that we did get a glimpse of him earlier in the laundromat, but keep going what you're saying about the new Wayman in the elevator.
Yeah, new Wayman in the elevator who has some instructions for Evelyn, and it's basically like, you can either go to this little session with a tax auditor, or you can go right to the janitor's closet. And he writes some things on the back of some papers that he just finds, which we later learn are the divorce papers that our Waymond had. But Evelyn doesn't see that. She just sees the instructions. They go to their little tax meeting with Jamie Lee Curtis as, what's her name?
Deirdre
Bobeirdre.
Deirdre.
Thank you, Deirdre. Is that really her last name?
Her last name is Bobeirdre. It is the best character name I've ever heard. Deirdre Bobeirdre.
It's perfect. I love that.
In her Oscar-winning supporting actress performance. And things get pretty crazy when Evelyn is kind of sick of this and looks at the instructions and kind of starts going into the multiverse.
Yeah, so kind of like what you're talking about, Max, like now we're fully at a really, like, obviously part of this is that she, this extends further into like this first act, but you could succinctly say that this is the quickest refusal of the call you've ever seen in a hero's journey, where they're in the village like, no, I'm not going to do that. That sounds silly. And then she's sitting there faced with like, the reality of her situation and everything going on with taxes. And she just kind of looks down at the paper. She's like, well, what the hell? Why not? I could switch feet, And then she does the instructions and is sucked into the closet and is properly introduced to Alpha Waymond. And Alpha Waymond is we met him in the elevator, but now we really kind of get to know more about him specifically. He is much more put together, much more confident. It's a fun little detail of he always takes his glasses off to like signal whether it's our Waymond or Alpha Waymond. I think that's really fun. I love the change in physicality he does. Like there's a slumpedness to the shoulders that he's got in, our Waymond. And then he immediately straightens up and like pulls his chin back and up. And like, there's just really, I love that distinction that he does. It's really great stuff. And then from here,
the movie. Sorry, go ahead. Keep going.
No, please.
I was just going to say the movie.
Guys,
damn it.
Guys, come on.
I was just saying that from here, the movie's off to the races. It's fine.
Yeah, I love that. I was just going to say, I love that the movie refers to Alpha Waymond himself as like the Macho Man version of Waymond. It's just very much like encapsulates all of that. But yeah, like you said, Parker, this movie gets off to the races after we're introduced to that. And that's where we really start to introduce a lot more of the like technical exposition, like what is the multiverse? How is it accessed? How do we get there? And we're introduced to verse jumping, which is essentially, you can access an alternate multiverse version of yourself that has made different choices in your life so that you have now different skills than you would have here. So Evelyn can verse jump and get to a universe where she has karate skills, and everybody can do those same things, but that's how we're introduced, is through Alpha Wayman, which I think is just so smart.
In a really fantastic action sequence following him eating some chapstick, which I forgot, it takes longer for them to explain why he does that than I thought. Like a little while later, he's like, you have to do something weird, Evelyn, you have to do it, as they're kind of fighting their way down the tax building to the ground floor. But yeah, like he just takes a bite of chapstick and then he can beat up all these guys with his fanny pack, which is fantastic.
Which I love that you bring that up, Max, because eating chapstick is like so absurd and silly. And I feel like up to that point in the movie, we really haven't gotten the absurdness and silliness to the full extent. So kicking us off on an action sequence with this little silly eating chapstick gag is a great way to introduce us to the silliness of the movie later, I feel like.
Yeah. And also we get the dimension that Alpha Wayman takes Evelyn into in the janitor's closet is like a smaller kind of pocket dimension of sorts that only exists for a brief time for this conversation. And then there's kind of this horror moment of Bagel Deidre breaking through the door and killing Waymond and Evelyn. Or rather, killing Waymond and then Jobu Tapaki being introduced. Like, we don't see her face, but she walks up. And I love the visual of, like, touching someone and they cycle through a bunch of different outfits and they, like, kind of burst in, like, a bunch of different universes. Like, it's incredibly well done. And I like, Jake, that you brought up the technical exposition, because there's a lot of it as they're kind of working. They after Waymond beats up a bunch of tax officers and like security officers, they're kind of wanted, obviously, and they have to like rush down the building. And that's a lot of the movie, but it's so spread out because there's so much exposition and so much of Evelyn understanding verse jumping and them having to fight different people and different things. And it's really incredible how succinctly this movie gets across all of its techno jargon without leaning on any like pop culture references. Like I think about other movies that do tech jargon and they're like, oh, it's like Back to the Future. Like there's so much of this movie that could be like, oh, it's like these other things you might have seen. But there's none of that here. And I think part of that's because this is such a different story that there isn't really, like, this kind of came out early in the multiverse fanaticism that we're in right now. But I think, I don't know, I was just really impressed that there's no like, oh, to make it easier for you, let me just reference something else that you might have seen. It's rooted in this world and rooted in this movie, and it's doing its own thing, which I think is really impressive.
And the only time they do that is specifically for a joke about Ratatouille. That is the only pop culture reference we get, is when she's trying to explain it and she sounds ridiculous. And they're like, what are you talking about?
And she's getting it wrong, but also right in a different timeline. Like,
right. Which is, it's so funny.
That's like the only, that's a good point. I had forgotten about the Rakakuni.
Right. But just like, just supporting your point that like the filmmakers feel aware of that, where they're like, okay, the one time somebody's going to try and do that trope of comparing it to something the audience knows, it's A, going to be wrong, and B, is just played as a joke.
Right. Yeah.
Which I like that a lot. I think it's really good. We knew it was only a matter of time, Max, before Doctor Who got brought up on the podcast, but it entirely feels like a Peter Capaldi's like, I want you to imagine Ratatouille. It's nothing like that.
Yeah, it's very that. You're absolutely right.
Which I just think is fun, and I agree. Like I think it's good solid writing to be able to explain something that could be so easily bogged down in the technicality and the hiccups, and like this movie almost feels like, and maybe this is me stretching a little bit, so if you guys are like, Parker, this isn't the case, swap me down, but like it feels like this movie almost intentionally is going out of its way to just give a giant dildoed middle finger to all of like plot hole film culture of like, oh, we're going to ding this movie. And it's like, I don't care. It doesn't matter. We're going to move so fast, you aren't even going to be able to keep up. And sure, there's going to be little things here and there, but none of it matters.
Yeah.
I just think that's great.
And that also ties directly into the theme of the movie.
That's what I was going to say. Parker, I don't know if you did that on purpose or not, but ending that little paragraph with, and none of it matters, you really did this movie a service for that. No, but you're exactly right.
Perhaps I led us there.
You're exactly right, though. Like, it moves so quick, and we jump back and forth from universe to different universe to different universe, and we're crossing into universes that are playing as movies and other universes, and we're getting lost in all of that mess, and it's not really... This is where it loses some of its tightness to me, is it kind of just makes up stuff and makes up rules that work in one universe that don't work in the other, and why are we watching this now, but then this character's watching this now? It's just absurd, but to your point, I think it's great about just shutting down and trying to give us that expectation as an audience of like, yeah, if you're here to like analyze this plot and look for holes, you're going to find so many, and we're here to tell you that is not what this movie is even about. Yeah, did you guys see that? Did you guys know Zoom does that now?
I had no idea it does that.
Thumbs up.
They also just an aside, they do... How can I do this?
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
For everyone just listening, Zoom does little pop-ups now, and Jake did a thumbs up, and then an animated thumbs up showed up, and
Max
Parker
and I both leaned forward and went, huh?
we were really shocked.
It's like, wow.
Technology is wild.
He brought effects into this?
I was like, wow. Not to take away from your point, Jake.
Yes,
He's got
that's
a greater
point.
VFX team than the EEAO team. There's like 4 people did all the VFX for that movie.
That's and we'll really get into that.
I have lots of things I want to say about that.
But I do want to say, through here we meet Jobu Tupaki for the first time fully, of taking over Joy's body in this universe and approaching, and her coming out in like the Elvis outfit with the dog, and then beating a man with really large dildos. Comically large is incredible. And then to have Evelyn enter the universe where fingers are hot dogs. This is kind of really just throwing us in of being like, but there's that level. So there's that height of absurdity. And at the same time, they're also introducing not just like alternate universes, but like split timelines. So Evelyn is both in the tax building and also in the van driving home with Waymond. Mm-hmm. And she's experiencing this too. And I think that's something that really works as well, is she is really struggling to keep her mind in all of this. And ultimately the plot of this movie becomes her having to break her brain, like having to become so overwhelmed with it. Like the movie recognizes that so much of this can just come across as noise. And it uses that as a key theme of the world is so full of noise now.
Yeah.
And I remember an interview with Daniels where they were talking about how that there's just so much going on all the time. How can you possibly keep track of it all? How can you possibly live with all of this just kind of nonsense on the internet and in the news? And I think the movie does a great service to itself. And it's such a clever idea of literally being like, the multiverse is overwhelming. It's an overwhelming concept that isn't accessible and really, really hard to grasp. And it would just be insanely hard to exist in if you could sense all of it at once. And I think that is, I don't know, it's just a really clever allegory and an analogy or whatever, the word is.
Yeah.
The movie...
Go ahead.
The movie somehow takes the audience itself on the exact character journey that everybody else is going through, right? Like, we're grounded when the characters are grounded. And then when Evelyn is overwhelmed, we're overwhelmed. And then when Joy is introduced and Jobu Tupaki is introduced, and her character or her whole character outlook on this world is what you just said, Max. It's all too overwhelming. How can we understand it all? How can we appreciate it all? Everything's happening all at the same time. It feels like in this just crazy world. And so as that concept is introduced in the film, that's also when that character kind of steps up and says, hey, this is what I'm feeling, this is what I'm experiencing. And we get to experience that sort of by proxy as the audience, which I just think is such masterful filmmaking. I think Joy being introduced with this idea is really what kind of spearheads all of the emotional work that comes after in the third act of the film.
Yeah, I completely agree. And kind of jumping off those 2 points that you had, this idea of split timelines in our own reality is such a good narrative device because it essentially allows the film to keep its very tight ensemble cast while also having that meanwhile back at the farm style of storytelling where, okay, once we've exhausted all points of interest on one plot line, we go and jump over here. There's a really good interview with Lawrence Kasdan, who wrote Empire Strikes Back, talking about that like, as you're working through that film, when you are at a stopping point with the Han and Leia stuff, to break up the monotony, we go back over to Luke. And the same thing when Luke is done, we jump back over. And like, it's a very common way of keeping stories moving and keeping them interesting. And I love that, like, without introducing more characters, this film gets the meanwhile back at the farm by cutting back and forth between whichever split version of reality we're existing in at the time. I just think it's really clever. I think it's very well done in that regard.
Yeah, nice.
Yes. Go ahead.
This is kind of a broader conversation, but I do want to bring it up because it makes me very happy in so many regards. A bunch of this stuff, especially early on with the things we've been talking about of Jobu Tupaki showing up and the jumping back and forth between different realities and all this stuff that's happening while we're still kind of in the IRS building. I love how, as flashy as this movie is, how insanely low tech most of this stuff is. Like, most of the verse jumping is special effects we've been using since the inception of cinema. Like, a jump cut is used so effectively in this movie all the time. Like, our very first intro to Jobu, I really love, is like the head ticking back and forth and each time cutting back into a different reality. And same sort of thing when she shows up at the IRS building. The swapping of outfits is literally just a jump cut. She throws her head back, and so does the police officer. It cuts to black for a second, and then they're in a new outfit. And it's like, this is such basic special effects stuff, but it's so polished and so well done here that it works on an entirely different level, and I love that. And so much of this movie, the way it's put together, is really scrappy in that regard. They, for the footage of when Evelyn is being, like, ripped back into other universes, the background of that stuff, one of the directors just walked around for like 6 months with a little like camcorder GoPro in his pocket, and he would just take footage when he would be walking down the street. So like, there's streets of, LA, and there are supermarkets and office buildings, and it's just stuff that he gathered like on this tiny little camera, and then they splice it in and, project it behind her. And I love that level of like DIY-ness that's put together in this whole film. And, you made mention of it earlier, like a VFX team of like 4 people. It's wild.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and also shout out to just a spinning light that changes colors, that they just move around the faces to show like a shifting and like seeing the full multiverse. Like, it is so scrappy and low tech, which is just such a testament to what filmmaking is. Like, there's just this need now for movie. They're not a need, but studios are like, we need to spend like $400 million making this movie that will, because it costs that much, it needs to make like $2 billion to, make a return that we are looking for. And it's like, when that's happening, and then you have Everything Everywhere All at Once, which like stayed in theaters for a really long time, came back to theaters, won Best Picture, won at the Oscars, like a huge sweep. It's just, again, it's a testament to so much of what Parker and I talk a lot about in this show when we talk about earlier films. When we talked about Metropolis specifically, it's like, these are like, this is paper. Like, this is paper, and this is like a light change. And that's what visual art and filmmaking is. And so I agree, Parker, that this movie is such like a testament to and showcase of just creative filmmaking. And so much of the best filmmaking is just, well, what can we do with what we have? Rather than, well, let's spend this extra $1 billion to put a mustache on somebody,
Right.
Like, I don't know. I absolutely agree. I love this movie for that. So kind of jumping forward, I do just want to give a shout out to one of my favorite moments and gags in this movie is when, and I'm jumping really far.
Sure.
But when it feels
away.
like it's not that far, but when Evelyn dies, in kind of the garden floor of the IRS building, like in that dirt patch. And then it pulls back. Well, it doesn't pull back. It just says, the end, directed by Daniels, and then the credits start playing, and they like hold on that for a long time. And it's like, you don't think that's the ending, but you're like, what's going on? And the directed by Daniels is such a nice touch. And I know, Jake, you were saying earlier, like, yeah, it's just one of those absurd moments that you're like, this doesn't make any sense, but it's so funny. Because then it pulls back and they're like watching it in the theater in like the Kung Fu movie star universe for Evelyn. And I think, who is it that, is it Wayman who turns around and is like, that was a sad ending? Like, that was sad.
Yeah, it was.
It's really good.
I love that. Also, in that kind of Kung Fu Hollywood universe, love seeing just a frame rate slowed down, just a slow frame rate for like emotional purposes. Like, again, that's just something that's
the shutter speed changes.
The shutter speed change. Yeah, that's what. Yeah.
It's both. It's a lower frame rate, but then also they're getting that like blurriness.
Just a really nice effect, and it is almost like homage to, you know, kind of would that be what was an homage to again?
It's Wong Kar-wai.
It's Wong Kar-wai. Yeah.
It's the films of Wong Kar-wai. It's very like In the Mood for Love.
Right.
And I
Express.
love that aspect so much. And again, this movie is made by people who love movies. Like just every single version of this, like every universe we spend a lot of time in is pulling stylistically from something. Like the Hot Dog Fingers universe looks and feels like her. Like it looks like, you know, that movie and that color saturation and just
like a spike. Yeah.
And I think that's great. Like it just makes me very happy to see that kind of like visual pulling from everything. And yeah, I don't know. I could talk about it a lot, but I just think that's really great. And to your point, I love that gag. One that gets me every time. And again, like it gets me excited because filmmakers who are hitting the mainstream in big ways like this are getting closer and closer to like our age and our generation. And so the references and the jokes they're making are very timely for us. And like the one that, you know, we all called it out when we were watching the movie because we love it, is during the fight scene. It shows up twice in the movie. They put the Super Smash Bros sound in. They do the knock out of the stadium sound, and we all just freaked out. We're like, ah!
I had either forgotten or completely missed that the first time, and I lost my mind.
I love it so much. It makes me laugh every time. It makes me cheer. It just gets me so excited, and I just think that's great. You know,
it's a great choice. It's a great choice.
Jake, do you have any moments like that? Are there any gags or like little tidbits that you just really love in this movie?
You know, it's so full of so many hilarious visual gags. I'm a big fan of action scenes, so I love the action scenes, but what I love is when they incorporate their absurd and silly little quirks into the action scenes. Like, okay, I mean, aside from the fact that you already brought it up, you know, we're having a fight with comically large dildos, or we're having a fight while butt plug trophies are sticking out of our butts, you know, like that's one thing and that's hilarious. But then on top of that, what if you're having a fight and in the middle of it, because Evelyn has to do something weird to gain new skills and new abilities in the middle of these fight scenes, what if she has to just do a bunch of crazy stuff in the middle as she's fighting? So she'll punch a guy and shove him off and then grab a porcelain frog, try to swallow it, then the frog gets stuck in her throat, right? Just so silly. And then she swallows it and gets new powers. Like, what kind of world are we in where we're just... I just love the creativeness and the silliness of it all, and incorporating that into highly stylized movie things that we already love, like action sequences, like family dramas, like comedy. Like, we're taking all of these things that we already know and love and just adding the Daniels like silly spin on it, silly existential spin.
Totally. And like, it's what makes so much of that work is fully committing to the bit, right? Like, I think the hardest I laugh in this movie every time is the fight scene with Jenny Slate and the dog, because she's so into it, and they make the dog growl and it turns into like a ball and chain flail that she's throwing around. But they go in and put the dog sounds in as it's like flying over Evelyn's head. But everybody's treating this like it feels like, you know, Éowyn and the Witch King in Lord of the Rings. Like, it feels like she's got like this giant like spike ball mace that she's throwing around, but it's a dog on a retractable leash.
Well, and also that the dog is clearly a stuffed animal.
Right. right.
But the movie
Yeah,
isn't
the
like
puppet
asking
dog.
you to believe that the dog is real. It's just
Mhm.
like, you understand what we're doing here.
Right.
Like, we don't need it to be like, that's the most realistic dog puppet I've ever seen. It's just like, no, it can be a stuffed animal.
It could be a stuffed animal that she's throwing around.
And it's perfect. But yeah, is there anything else in this kind of like, we've kind of skimmed a lot of this middle section with a lot of really good action sequences and gags, and there's a lot of emotional work being done. But I feel like we really want to talk about the ending, right? But before we get into that, is there anything that anyone else wants to bring up here? I love Alpha Gong Gong. I think he's when James Hong gets to just play a Bond villain is really fantastic.
It's a great way of putting it.
Love the use of Joy and Waymond as like further cementing to people who might not be fully caught up yet of being like, I think she has to do something weird to get her powers.
Yeah.
And then like having fun with that. Like, it's just really efficient. It's just but that doesn't mean that it's any less fun. But yeah, is there anything else that anyone wants to bring up from this kind of large chunk?
I think.
Oh, go ahead.
I think we've covered a lot of really great stuff. I think you both have contributed a lot, which is awesome. The only other thing I would want to say, and this is less of a moment and more of a concept, but just, you mentioned, we've swept over a lot of these fight sequences, the gags, the emotional work being done. In addition to that, I just want to, like, first of all, if you haven't seen this movie already, you got to go see it to fully understand what we're talking about. But as they're going through all of these things in the middle section of the movie, the characters are just being more and more solidified into the roles that they have to play for the ending to work. Like, Evelyn is trying to understand her daughter more through this whole middle section and is kind of getting it, but is struggling with trying to see the world through her eyes. Alpha Gong Gong, or the grandpa of the family, right? He is getting further and further solidified as being farther away from the family and almost like an enemy to the family, right? He, in the plot of the movie, is trying to get rid of everything that Jobu Tupaki, or Joy, is bringing up. He doesn't want anything to do with that, and he's trying to shut it all down, which really speaks to, I think, his entire generational age as the characters in this movie, right? So you have Alpha Gong Gong, who's trying to shut down the family, Evelyn, who's trying to understand the family more but is really struggling, Waymond, who continues in his stalwart optimism, and Joy, who really kind of stands up as more of a protagonist than we originally thought in this movie. We start to empathize with her points of view more, and we start to see her character more and spend more time with her, so that at the end of the movie, all the emotional payoffs can, I think, really land. Just another testament to this film's concise, effective, efficient storytelling.
Totally.
Yeah. A good point that I also want to bring up, Jake, that you reminded me of is I love the moment when Evelyn sees Jobu Tupaki for the first time and is like, Jobu Tupaki is my, like, you, like, I love the way she puts it of the evil is in my joy, which feels like such, there's obviously a double meaning there, which is just very interesting.
Right.
But then also her being like, you are doing all these things. You made her hate me. You made her gay. And Jobu Tupaki just stopping and being like, you're still on that? Like, you're still hung up on that. But then also, we didn't even talk about Jobu Tupaki's entire thing is introduced in this middle section, which is that she put everything on a bagel, and she means everything in all of reality, just to see what would happen. And it became this black hole that sucks in everything and is basically just like, I like to think of it, she went doom scrolling and then put all of doom scrolling in Twitter on a bagel and then went, oh God, I think I want to die.
That's
right?
so
Like,
perfectly explained, Max. That is exactly what it is.
Yeah.
100%.
Like that's the feeling that she's going through, which is something that we've all encountered before.
Totally.
Of just looking at a computer for a little too long and then being like, I think everything is terrible and we should all just give up. And I think it's tapping into such like a 2020s kind of theme and mindset that everyone is in at this point. Like late 2010s now, just like, what are we doing? Like nothing matters. And
Your
I
coffee
love that.
just tastes wrong. We can't get back to where we were.
Oh yeah, I love
It's a
like
great
that.
line.
I love that line of how can we get back? Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, it's all really fantastic. I'm so glad you pointed that out, Max, because I love using joy as a vehicle for both like audience frustrations and like just burnout of just like, man, it's tough out here. And also narratively having Jobu Tupaki stand in as a way of like bringing to light fully the problems that Evelyn still has to overcome. That like, she may try to say that she's supportive. She may try to say that she understands joy. But when given a scapegoat, when given an option of saying, oh, everything wrong with my daughter, I can explain away as this. Mm-hmm. Suddenly all of that comes up. And it's such a good, like, real world parenting thing that I find is just that idea of like, well, no, like, this isn't your fault. This is just this terrible thing that you've got going. She's like, nothing is terrible about this. This is who I am. Like, why are you trying to take pieces of me away? And later on, like, it keeps coming back of later on, there's a conversation. I can't remember exactly how it gets queued up, but Jobu is telling Evelyn, she's like, you don't need to worry about anything anymore. You don't need to worry about like grandpa not accepting me. She's like, no, like you don't understand. Like he's just of a different generation. Like, it's okay. You don't need to hide behind him anymore. And it's just, I like that aspect of like how it's examining these generational jumps and this extension of generational trauma. Like a moment that gets me just so teary every time I see it. Again, jumping around a lot, but like near the end of the movie, is Evelyn stands her ground against her father and says, I am not going to do to her what you did to me. I am not going to let her go the way that you so easily let me go. And it's just like breaking generational trauma. It's great. I love it.
Right. Yeah, she has that beautiful line of, it's okay if you're not proud of me because I finally am, which I don't know if anything describes generational trauma more than that line alone. You know, it's just, it's such a great moment.
It's good. It's good stuff.
Yeah. And I think also, I had a thought and then I lost it. And I was trying to keep a lull from happening by going, and also, but and then also my thought was gone. So
it'll come back to you. I think we've got a nice kind of gravitational pull into the third act at this point. Yes. So getting the ball rolling, just kind of talking about some of our favorite moments from this third act. My favorite moment of the movie, and it is consistently stayed so, like there are so many good ones, like I already mentioned, there are lots of moments that make me cry in this, there are lots of moments that get me right up in my feelings. The one that will always sit atop the pinnacle for me, just based on like my own experiences in my own life, is Wayman's monologue about the way he chooses to fight when they're back in the Wong Kar-wai universe. And it is just gutting. It's so perfect. And like everybody online takes the end of it, which is equally good, which is just, you know, in another life, I think I would have liked just doing laundry and taxes with you. And like everybody grasps onto that because it is such a nice button. But like everything leading up to that is my favorite part of the movie, where he talks about like, you think of yourself as a fighter, and you always have been. He said, but I'm a fighter too. Like me being soft, me being gentle is how I've stayed alive this entire time. Like this is how I go through life, and it's my way of fighting. It may not be the same as your way, but it is a way. It is still fighting. It is still battling against the nihilism bagel we are all experiencing and choosing to believe that nothing matters. You can choose to fight that, as Evelyn does, with fists and with intensity and action. Or you can choose to fight it like Wayman does, with kindness and gentility and patience and perseverance and optimism. And just that entire scene, like we talked about it a little bit, and I'll mention it again when we get to criteria, but like watching this again with you guys, I noticed that all that stuff at the IRS is a lot of fun, but it does, like, I was noticing while I was watching, I was like, this does drag a little bit. Like it does kind of go off the rails and just keeps going. And we're just kind of here in the middle of all of this craziness. And I was watching it, and it had been, you know, probably the better part of a year since I'd watched this. And I was like, did it drop? Like, has it been long enough away from this that I'm starting to like see the cracks a little bit more? And Wayman's monologue in this entire third act, like, it's almost like, I don't know that we've talked about this on mic before, Max, but I know that we have, of like, the idea of a 5-star movie does not mean a movie is perfect. It means it balances itself out in the right way of like, you could say that the first 2/3 of this movie might be like 3.5 stars. But if you say that the third act of the movie is 7 stars, it naturally balances itself out to being a 5-star movie. Even if you look at the elements, you're like, yeah, there are pieces that just don't work for me. But the pieces that do work are so elevated that it doesn't matter anymore, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And that's kind of how I feel about like this entire third act, is that I really love a lot of this movie, and the things that don't work for me about the first part of this movie, I forget about because I'm bawling my eyes out for 30 minutes at the end of this.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
Max, what are your... Oh, go ahead, Max.
Go ahead. No, ask me the question.
I was going to ask, what are some of your favorite moments from the end? Parker, everything you said was so gorgeous, and I relate to so much. I love that you said it. Max, what do you like?
I think a key part of it for me, Parker, along with the monologue and along with that ending, the button that people talk about, is just the montage. There's been a lot of good montages of life in movies lately that make me cry. Mm-hmm. But I think it also does a good job of, throughout the movie, seeding that of, at the beginning when Evelyn is first kind of experiencing being in 2 places at once, she's not paying attention to Deidre at the tax evaluation. And you see it a lot in the party that they're at. And it takes a long time for Evelyn to actually like come to and notice what he's doing and how he's talking to Deidre. But through the whole movie, you see him telling people like, no, please wait. No, she's, we're not trying to do anything. And then this montage just points it out fully of like, he is talking to people. He is communicating with people. He is connecting. He is trying in that way. And I think it really just kind of pulling all those other moments from earlier in the movie really works for me. And I also think that something that's really cool about this is like another thing of like looking at it as the internet and looking at it as doom scrolling. I love that this older generation is like, something shifted. I don't know what it is. And for Joy's character, who's in her early 20s, she's like, I figured out what it was. I know what it is. I've seen everything. So if you take the bagel as being the internet, just how younger generations spend way more time on the internet and have seen all the shit. They're like, this is why I have given up and this is why nothing matters. This is why I'm nihilistic. But I love that older generations still feel that something has shifted, because you still would, because something in our culture has shifted. But I love that they're not aware of what it is until she shows it. It's like showing your older parent the internet and being like, look at how terrible everything is. And then what would their reaction be to that? But I also love Waymond as someone who is like, no, I still choose to believe in these things. And I talked about it with you both after we watched the movie I have a really hard time with the phrase nothing matters. I have a really hard time with it because to me, that's just such a mean way of putting it, in my opinion. Like, I understand it and I don't dislike anyone for saying it. I don't dislike this movie for saying it.
Right.
But I have a really hard time with that phrasing, but because I prefer that, like, nothing matters except for what we do. Like, I feel like it's a way of just saying that nothing matters on a grand scheme. Like, there's no set plan. There's nothing you have to do. But, and it's, I don't know. It's kind of that point of the movie there. I don't know.
Yeah. No, that's such a really succinct way of putting it, especially like everything you're talking about the internet. I think that's all so good, Max. Thank you for sharing.
Okay, Max, I love everything that you just said. I feel like it's so brilliant and just really captures what, in my opinion, is the heart of the whole movie. Kind of taking us back into that third act, there's a really iconic shot that encapsulates, I think, the relationships between Alpha Gong Gong, which I'm going to speak to in regards of like the boomer generation, and then, Evelyn, who I'm just going to refer to like the Gen X generation, which I don't know if that's correct, but you get it. And then Joe Tupaki / Joy, which is millennials and Gen Z, right? So there's a shot in the third act where the bagel is at the top of the stairs. Joy is about to surrender herself to the nihilistic approach of that the bagel represents. And she's kind of diving into the bagel. Evelyn is tugging on behind her, and Waymond's there too, I think. And Grandpa Gong Gong is, in the back in his like wheelchair fax machine, like whatever mech suit.
It's really
and
great.
he's like holding all of them back. So I just think what's wonderful about this movie is I think it encapsulates like the darkness that each of those generations feel. it shows how that darkness affects their relationships with each other. And it shows in the third act a solution on how we can move forward as a human race. So like if you look at the boomer generation, I feel like so many of them are so strict in their values that they grew up with. And anything that's new or foreign to them, just for some reason, in my experience, my interaction with a lot of boomers, it just really frustrates them having new ideas that are really scary and maybe potentially super progressive, or just things that they didn't grow up with can be really daunting to them. And for some reason, it just makes them react with this response of, I cannot let the world go down this path. And you see in the movie how Gong Gong trying to kind of, they're all trying to protect him, you know, by saying he's of a different generation and nobody wants to get up in his business. But because of that, like he has an adverse and hurtful effect on the rest of his family because of all of that. And in that scene, when they're on the staircase in the third act, we see, based off some interactions that we have with Gong Gong and Evelyn, like the way he has to heal his family and heal himself is he has to let go. And in the movie, he literally, in his mech suit, he lets go of Evelyn so that she can be with her daughter more. And he, in a sense, I think that's what maybe a boomer generation would have to do in order to find more peace and contentment in their life, is just let go of this world and these values that they've been clinging on to. They're going to have to find a way to live in a world that isn't the world they grew up in. And that's hard and that's scary. But the longer we hold on to that, the more we hurt our families. If you take that a step down and go to the Gen X generation, right, which would be Evelyn's, as you guys have mentioned so wonderfully, our parents sort of feel this shift that's happening in culture right now, right? There's more nihilism. There's more like disconnect because of the internet and things like that. So this Gen X is feeling the shift. They're feeling that their coffee is tasting wrong, so to speak, like it says in the movie, but they don't know exactly what it is. And they're just so concerned with getting back, you know? And I think what that speaks to is their own generational, like, where are they going to be comfortable? They want to be comfortable where they can get back to a place where everything makes sense for them, where they don't have to deal with the millennial struggles of complaining about all the things wrong in the world. You know, they just want to get back to a place where they can, like they grew up, put their head down and work and distract themselves until, and do the routine things that you're supposed to do in life, like get married and have kids and start a family and go to work. Like they're just in that routine and they just want to be happy in their routine. And so they're also like, they also struggle with this kind of millennial approach to things, this nihilistic approach, this approach that is so driven by the overwhelm that is living in the 2020s, right? So then taking that a step down, the only way Evelyn was able to heal herself and heal her family relationship in her perspective was by communicating what she felt to her daughter, which we get in the very last maybe 10 minutes of the movie. And then in addition to communicating all the things she was feeling, taking time to disconnect from the hustle and bustle of her head down, just get it done type of life, and finding time to create space to cherish the little moments that she shares with her daughter and her family. And then, yeah, I just think as millennials, you know, all of us kind of fit into that category, in the millennial Gen Z category. We're like Joy, you know, we see it all. Max brought this up so wonderfully. We're caught in this internet age where we're seeing, at the same time that people are so worried about how many likes and shares they're getting on their posts and if their filters are right, we're also seeing juxtaposed to that in the same social media strands, world wars going on the other side of the world, right? Like this, juxtaposing those two things, it doesn't make sense. The world is so confusing and so overwhelming, and we're in Joy's shoes, you know? When you consider everything that is the bagel, it doesn't make sense and it's scary. The effect that has on Joy is the same effect it has on us, right? We're overwhelmed, we're scared, we're anxious, we're more prone to mental health issues. And the movie even says, you know, this younger generation is, quote, losing all sense of morality or losing all sense of objective truth, right? The movie itself brings that up as a line, and that's how I think we often feel in our generation. But how do we overcome that? You know, where maybe the gut instinct is for us to just sit and stew in the nihilism, sit and stew in the bagel. The thing that actually brings Joy contentment is just embracing her mom, you know, finding joy in those little moments And when everything feels like it doesn't make sense, I think the only thing we can do is what Evelyn says to Joy at the very end of the movie, which is cherish those few specks of time where it does make sense. That I think is where the whole heart of the movie is. And I'm just so glad you brought that up, Max. I think this movie is so powerful because of how it ends.
Yeah. Thank you, Jake. That was fantastic.
It's a really beautiful way of putting it.
Really well put. Yeah.
No worries. Like I said, I was taking notes while you were speaking, so I had to lay it all out there.
Well, we're glad you did, because that's very, very eloquent. Yeah, I don't know. There's not. I could echo a lot of your points, but mostly just a big hearty second and agree that I think the movie does such a wonderful job of sticking that landing of, it could be a lesser movie, I think, would have cut one scene earlier, right? I don't think a lesser movie would have had the external conflict of what's going on at the with the IRS and the taxes just be that scene outside of the laundromat where they're talking. She's like, yeah, I know what it was like when my husband served me papers, and it's terrible and it's awful and everything falls apart. And it would just be this very clean, and now everything's fine. They don't have to pay their taxes. It's whatever. She understands. She gets it. But this movie brings us back to reality again. They still go in and she says, things are better. This looks a lot better. You've got things in order. Things are organized. But there's still these issues. You listened, but you didn't listen.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And here's all these things. And I love that little post-it note on the end of the movie of saying, hey, life is still going to suck. You're still going to have to pay your taxes. You're still going to get audited. But you have gone through this transformative experience. And how is that going to affect your day-to-day in the way that you interact, right? And the family dynamic is completely different when they're all there. There's still a lot of those elements, right? They're not completely different people in the way they interact with each other, but there's a kindness there, there's a gentility there, there's an understanding there that I think is so stark compared to the rest of the movie when none of the family members can connect with each other at all. And, like I mentioned earlier at the beginning of the movie, those little setups and payoffs of now Waymond is going to go run to the bathroom or grab something, and Evelyn grabs him and says, wait, and she gives him just a very sweet, tender kiss. And it's nice. It's nice to see them connecting in that way.
Well, and also that they're in this rush to this meeting, but they have time because nothing matters.
Right.
They have time for one another because nothing else really matters.
Yeah.
And that's really nice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's to your point, Max, it's about finding out the things that do matter and the things that don't, right? Evelyn at the beginning of the movie was hung up on all the details of her life, the taxes, the wrong white paint, the making sure all the customers have their bags in the right place. But in reality, when you boil everything that is the bagel down to it, the things that really matter most are just showing up for each other, are loving our family members or friends in our lives that act like family members, right? It's such a beautiful comparison, the end scene from the first scene in the movie. The first scene in the movie, we see him show up at the IRS, and anytime Deirdre Bobirja says something to Evelyn, she shuts down and she gets defensive. But by the end of the movie, she says, oh, well, you listened, but you didn't listen. And Evelyn starts to get distracted again, like she kind of does. But then when Deirdre Bobirja, kind of responds to her and comes at her a little bit like she did in the first, she said, are you listening? Rather than saying, yes, of course I'm paying attention. What do you mean? Just stop getting up in my business. She just says, oh yeah, I'm sorry, I was distracted. What did you say? And what a wonderful journey she's been through to get from the point at the beginning of the movie to where she's now. It's so beautifully told, I think.
Yeah.
Agreed.
And to take all of these wonderful comments and dilute it down to a very stupid little bit, which is that this entire movie is summed up in that internet meme of the two cartoon guys on a bus, and one of them is looking at the canyon wall and he's very depressed and sad, and then the other one's looking out at the beautiful view on the edge. And I've seen people use that meme, and it's the same caption both times. One guy's looking to the wall, he says, nothing matters. And the guy looking outside goes, nothing matters.
Yeah.
And it's just there's the sum of the movie, right? It's this whole idea, to your point, Max, of they can take the time because nothing matters. And it's this is going to sound a little bit weird, but like go with me for a second. I did my undergrad in theater, and a big thing that you learn in theater when you're doing stuff like voice and diction and line delivery is whether things end on like an uplift or a downlift. You can have an exact same line and things could be completely different. If you say, I went to the grocery store today, and it goes up vocally, as opposed to, I went to the grocery store today. There's a different feeling there, right? And the reason I bring this up is that I think this movie is a perfect summation of an uplift of an idea, of saying the end movie is ending on an uplift vocal structure, saying that, hey, nothing matters. And isn't that nice? And isn't it nice that we can just have these moments that we're going to connect with each other, and those moments make the craziness worthwhile and make things matter. Not everything has to matter, but these things do, and that's enough. And I just think that's a lovely little sentiment that this movie has to offer, and why this movie has been on my mind a lot lately since I've seen it.
Yeah.
And it's so cool, Parker, to your point, that it has the uplift, right? I think that's where it ends, as we get to that uplift. But the movie also shows you the downside. It is not shy away from the horrors of modern living, you know? It shows you, it lets us sit with those fears, and it really shows it to us in a way that is terrifying and scary, and we have to kind of look at our own humanity in this movie. But by the end, you're right, it does just bring it back to this very grounded, very calming, very sensible. Nothing matters, and because nothing matters, we have to prioritize the things that do matter. And that's the uplift. I just think it's so powerful.
Yeah. Any final thoughts, anyone, on just our summary of things? Good stuff, guys.
Raccacoonie was real.
Raccacoonie.
And that's really funny.
That's a real
really
thing.
funny that Randy Newman played Raccacoonie.
She's
sang a
seen
little
too
song.
much.
And sang a little song. She's seen too much. It's great.
That's such a great line.
Okay. Criteria? Okay. Let's start with, first and foremost, historical and technical relevance. Is there anything that this movie is doing in film landscape or in film craft that is setting new precedents?
I think this is a huge shift, personally. Yeah. I mean, we talked about it earlier. We touched on it. The visual effects, the budget of the film, diversity of the film, the fact that it won Best Picture, when most genre filmmaking does not win Best Picture, if not even getting a nomination. Yeah, I don't know. Those are my arguments, I think.
Yeah.
What do y'all think?
Jake?
I think you're spot on, Max. I think everything you said is right. I love, in comparing this movie to Citizen Kane, I bet both directors looked at a camera or looked at a weird thing and were like, can we try this? I don't know. Let's give it a shot and see if it works. So in that way, I think they're both doing really comparable things. I think we would be seriously remiss not to mention just the great impact that this has for showcasing and giving an opportunity to highlight Asian American voices and Asian American identities on film, especially as a lead aging Asian woman. You know, Michelle Yeoh has come out openly and spoken about how that's hard for her to get a gig like this in Hollywood, but she did. And I think this movie is advancing things in a lot more ways than maybe Citizen Kane was just technically at the time.
Sure. I think that's a really solid point, and I would agree with both of you. Also, super quick bit of housekeeping, because I'm terribly remiss as a host. Jake, could you just give us like a one-sentence summary on your thoughts on Citizen Kane? I didn't ask at the opening of the episode like I should have. I would love to just
totally
know like,
okay.
the briefest, like, what do you think of Citizen Kane generally?
For sure. I love it. I think it can be overhyped. I love it for what it did in history more than what it is as a movie. So
yeah, that's a really good way of putting it. I realized as we were going through, I was like, I didn't even set that up properly. But yeah, I would agree with both of you. I think this category is tough for me only in the sense of it is so recent. Like there is no distance from it right now, you know, as far as like, you know, it won Best Picture in March of this year. And so I will be very intrigued to see how the movie grows, gestates, matures as the years go on. based on all the things you guys already talked about, I think it's going to fit in fine. I think it's going to have a very secure spot in like the broader film canon as the years go on. In a similar way that, you know, Citizen Kane enjoys, I think. So I would also probably give the point to Everything Everywhere for this one.
Nice.
Feeling good about that?
I think so.
I think what Jake said really made the decision for me of like, at the time, Citizen Kane might have had like more cultural relevancy. But looking at, again, things change over time a little bit. And I think this is using a lot of techniques really well. And, but I think it also has like that cultural impact potentially. That kind of puts it over the edge for me. But yeah.
That's a great point. Okay, how well is this movie doing what it's trying to do?
For me, it works wonders and obvious, right, to everything I've said. This movie sums up everything that I feel about being alive. So for me, like, I think the existential ideas it's trying to communicate, the ideas it's trying to communicate about generational trauma, the ideas it's trying to communicate about love versus nihilism in the world, it all really, really works for me with flying colors. So from my end, I definitely think it serves up what it's trying to do, in addition to being just a really enjoyable, hilarious, action, sci-fi hodgepodge of all the movies. You know, it's so great.
Yeah. What about you, Max?
I mean, I think this movie should be impossible. This movie shouldn't exist in the way that it does, and it should be a mess, and it is not. And I think it is trying so many things. And I think that for the time that it's being made in, obviously it's able to do a lot more things than Citizen Kane was able to do. But I also think that Orson Welles wouldn't have been like, if only we had the effects budget to do giant dildos in Citizen Kane, you know? I don't think that's what he was thinking. But I do think, I don't know. I think, and again, yeah, call it recency bias. But I do think that this movie, for everything that it's trying to do and everything that was against it, it is doing it incredibly well. It hits emotionally, and it hit emotionally for a lot of people. And it worked so well that it, you know, even won over the Academy, like, you know, the Academy voters, which is like not young people. Like,
yeah.
Even if they were just like, yeah, I'll probably look like an asshole if I don't vote for this one. But yeah, it's just, I think that it did it so incredibly well that it, against all the odds, it achieved what it achieved.
It's a really good point.
Yeah, great points.
Great stuff across the board. Jumping off of your point there, Max, I'll go on the record. I'll be on mic saying, if Citizen Kane had a Raccacoonie puppet, we wouldn't even have this podcast. It would be no question. Citizen Kane would be the greatest film of all time, and we'd have to put it away. You know?
What if instead of Rosebud at the end, he said Raccacoonie?
Max, you beat me. Yeah. I was trying to figure out that joke. You beat me by 1 second, man.
And then they just throw Raccacoonie into a furnace. Yeah, it's perfect. Perfect ending to Citizen Kane.
Oh, Chad.
But no, I definitely, I agree. I think, like, just completely echoing your first sentiment, Max, that this movie should not work. This movie should be falling apart at the seams. And, like, having experience seeing their previous film, I feel that way a little bit about Swiss Army Man, where I'm like, okay, the gimmick gets in the way of, like, me connecting with this in a way that I want to. And it doesn't here. It only supports it. It only enhances it. And that's crazy. That's insane to me. Like, as somebody who is a writer, is a filmmaker, all of these things, I look at the way this thing is constructed. And it's just like, it's like the Taj Mahal built out of cards. I don't know how it's holding itself up, but I'm looking at this thing and I'm like, wow, like that is a feat. That is incredible that it is just there and I get to witness this thing and it isn't falling apart. And so, yeah, I agree.
How did a movie that's over 2 hours and has the credits roll at about the hour 30 mark keep us alert in its pacing? It should be falling apart every step of the way, and it isn't. You're great points to make.
Yeah, so fully agree on that side. This last one kind of goes without saying, but we'll do it out of a formality. How's this connecting with you on a personal level?
I'll go first. Let's do me, Parker, and then end with Jake.
Okay.
It connects for me a lot. I cry mostly at the Wayman stuff. I don't yet super relate to being a parent and that sort of thing, but it really connects with me. I think this time it really hit me at a time when I'm trying to figure out kind of what it means to have a purpose, and maybe it's okay to not have a purpose. And I think this movie, the second watch, kind of hit me at a good time for that. So yeah, I think I feel more watching this than I feel watching Citizen Kane, and that might just be this is more my kind of movie. But also, that's whatever. It's my show. Leave me alone.
You can do what you want. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, we do whatever we want. It's all subjective. It's a highly subjective show.
Max is finding his purpose. Give him a break.
Barker, what about you emotionally?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I bawl through the last 30 minutes of this movie. Like you said, the Wayman stuff a lot. To your point, I am very excited if my life goes this direction. I am stoked to someday revisit this movie as a parent and see what new layers come of this. Like that's an aspect of film that I love so much, is that you can always find new things. And I had a really great conversation in undergrad with one of Jake and I's professors, Dr. Bishop, and we were talking about the movie Whiplash. And we all really enjoy that movie. And he's like, that movie hits completely different when you're a teacher. He's like, you don't justify J.K. Simmons by any stretch. He's like, but you get it. You understand some of the arguments he's making. He's like, because you ask yourself those questions of, when is it okay to try and like push students when I see potential in them versus what is way too far over the line. And that's a perspective I don't get from the movie. I only identify with Miles Teller, and maybe someday I'll have a perspective on J.K. Simmons in the same way that, someday I'm really excited to see what this movie draws out of me in the idea of parenthood if my life goes that direction.
Yeah.
But yeah, just I think this movie just works for me. I don't know. It just it hits me on a guttural human level in a very profound and deep way. So absolutely. What about you, Jake?
Yeah. Well, I love everything that both of you have said, so thank you for sharing. A fact I will share is I have seen Citizen Kane twice and cried neither time. And another fact I will share is I have seen Everything Everywhere All at Once 15 times, and I have sob cried every single time watching that movie. So obviously it emotionally impacts for me. The only thing I'll say in addition to that is and this is totally just me, this is a personal thing, doesn't have to be something that anyone else relates to, but I look at the world around me and I look at people and it freaks me out a lot. I have a hard time understanding life and the purpose of it and what it's all doing and why we're here and what it's all for when there's just so much messiness, right? And I think this movie is what has shown me what I need to do to live and deal with those fears and to find meaning in my life by choosing to prioritize and cherish the loving, caring moments I have with people around me, as compared to focusing on the overwhelming fear that this all might not make sense. So if you haven't seen this movie and you're experiencing anything like that, I highly encourage you to go watch it. This movie emotionally hits so many beats that I think are so relevant to any generation of person living in 2023. So go watch this movie. It's great. And in my opinion, it is better than Citizen Kane.
Nice. There it is.
There it is.
I agree. This is one of our first clean sweeps, or...
Yeah, I think so. I think this is one of our first 3 across the boards.
I don't remember if we've had one before. Usually Citizen Kane takes one.
Yeah.
I'll also say this in defense of Citizen Kane. It's not trying to make you cry.
Sure.
I feel like
Fair.
we just need to make that clear also. That, we're not trying to say that Citizen Kane's please feel
Well, it's
bad
because
for
they
this
didn't
man.
burn Rakakuni. I would have sobbed.
I would have sobbed.
I would have
they burned
fallen to
Rakakuni.
pieces.
But they burned a sled that I went, it's a sled.
Yeah, it's a sled.
But yeah, I still think as far as emotional connection, obviously,
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I don't know. I didn't want anyone to be like, actually, Citizen Kane isn't trying to make you cry. And I'm like, I know, we know.
Yeah, I know. We know that.
Emotional-
We know that. Thanks.
I hate to create a straw man, but
Emotional connection does not mean crying, you goons.
yeah.
You odd bros.
Yeah.
Good.
Well, yeah.
So
great.
So that was our subjective answer. Taking a step back from our criteria, do we objectively say that it is better than Citizen Kane?
Yes.
I think yes.
I'm going to say yes as well.
Hey, there it
Nice.
is.
Go
Jake's-
figure.
Jake's the one of us who likes Citizen Kane the most, I believe. So
I think so. Yeah.
Likely.
it's almost like Jake brought a movie that he firmly believed was better than Citizen Kane.
Hmm.
And
You caught me.
See, Jake, all I'm going to say is that this episode would have played out very differently had you subjected us to Avatar as you had threatened to do.
Oh,
That
I
would have
was
been a
so
different
close.
episode, buddy.
I
Maybe
was
next
so
time.
close, you guys.
maybe
Here's
next
the
time
thing,
you come in.
I wasn't ready to be verbally abused in public.
We
I think you guys would have attacked me. I think you guys would have attacked my opinions.
yeah.
And that's
Yep.
okay. We can still be friends and have different opinions. But yeah, we don't have to talk
You-
about
you-
Avatar anymore.
You
though.
know me, Jake. Vicious, constantly, always at your throat, never stop.
just-
Yeah, we really hate it
just-
when someone has a different opinion than us.
We
Can't
just literally
stand
spent a good chunk of time talking about how to really breach the things that keep us separate and get us all together. And then we end this talking about one of the things that keeps us most separate from each other is my opinion versus Avatar, my opinion of Avatar versus your opinion of Avatar.
Well, we'd love to have you back on, Jake, and maybe you can
Absolutely.
maybe you can bring Avatar next
Bring
time.
Avatar. I would love for you to talk me into it. Honestly, like I'm rooting for you. I'm rooting for you to convince me to like.
I
this
would love for
Thank
you
you.
to talk Parker into liking Avatar. I would love for you to do that.
Max wants to observe. I will bring a notepad and really just rip you a new one, you guys.
Perfect. Can't
Perfect.
wait. Looking forward to it. Well, thank you so much, Jake.
Yeah,
No,
thank
it's
you.
been an honor being here.
A
Thank
pleasure
you so
having
much.
you.
I love these movies and I love you guys, so keep it up.
Thank you so
Thanks
much.
so much. Well, Max, would you like to tell the dear listeners what's coming next?
Next time, we will be talking about a film near and dear to and then I just start crying. No, it's When Harry Met Sally. It's When Harry Met Sally. Really cool of us to just do.
Really cool of us.
Yeah, we're really cool, and that movie's really cool. So
A good movie.
come back
a
for-
perfect
come back
fall
for that.
movie. Mm-hmm. Yes, looking forward to that. Really excited to talk about it. But yes, as always, thanks so much for tuning in, everybody. It's wonderful having you, and we'll catch you next time.
yeah, see you next time. Thanks again,
care.
Jake.
Thanks, Jake.
Thank you.